Hello, Feminine Roadmappers. Welcome back to Feminine Roadmap Podcast, the podcast that helps you navigate the challenges and the changes of midlife and empowers you to live a more vibrant second half. If you are on YouTube today, please don't forget to ring that bell so you don't miss any more of these conversations. And if you're on a podcast platform, please remember to subscribe, rate, and share. Today, we are going to be talking about cancer. My guest is passionate about helping middle-aged women with cancer. She helps us find natural solutions to help with the underlying causes of the cancer, because she believes when you support the body itself then can do its job in fighting the cancer. My guest today is Katrina Foe. She's a nutritional therapist and a speaker, and she has an amazing online program called Cancer Freedom. Katrina, thank you so much for being on my show today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to talk about this topic.
I'd love to hear a little bit about, your mission and message. Of course, I have a little bit of information, but why don't you let my audience know why this is the thing that you love to do?
Well, it's kind of a personal story. So a while ago, I had my own journey with cancer. And I just have to back up and say, I had already been doing, all the stuff. We were eating super healthy and clean, and I had gotten a lot of the, toxic toiletries and cleaning products and stuff out of my life. And yet I still ended up with breast cancer at age 37, which is incredibly young in my opinion. And it was shocking to all my friends and family. And the process of, why did this happen to me, and really wrestling with that question and researching and diving in of what am I doing that is wrong? Because clearly something's not working for my body if it's developing cancer. And that the whole process just fascinated me. And I learned so much in it that I just don't hear people talking about.
Mhm.
And I really feel passionate that this needs to get out there so people know that they have more options than just the standard surgery, radiation, and chemotherapy, which have their time and place, but it's not all that there is. And there's, the missing question that I asked of why did this happen to me that is never even addressed? It's the elephant in the room that I think every cancer client wrestles with at some point of, why me? How did this happen?
Yeah. It's becoming more and more common, isn't it, to hear of someone?
Unfortunately, yes. And it's very interesting to me because I don't know if it's just who I draw because of my own journey, but almost all of my clients are middle-aged women, which is very scary because that's not who should be getting cancer. That's not who has been getting cancer historically. It's the older population. And I only have one person. I think my oldest client's in her 60s, which is not even that old, so this is something different that we're seeing. And my clients are very educated. They're researchers. They're doing the stuff like I was, and they just want to understand more, how in the world did this happen? Because it's not just chance, like we've been told. There are things that we can see when we do testing that are issues that should be addressed.
What are some of those underlying issues that you're seeing repeat themselves?
I'm so glad you asked that. There are 10 root cause drivers, and these are buckets that each have several things, in them. But there are areas that we can look at very concretely for the most part to see what's going on. And these are things that, this isn't stuff I've made up. This is in the research, in the literature of things that we know drives cancer. It's associated with, it's a big deal. This is not just made up. So the first one would be metabolic. So cancer is a metabolic disease. We've known this since the 30s when Otto Warburg won the Nobel Prize, showing that a cancer cell is different from a regular cell because the metabolism has shifted to anaerobic, meaning it doesn't use oxygen and it needs insane amounts of blood sugar to proliferate and go crazy. This is how a PET scan works. You feed it radioactive sugar, and then you look for where the tumor is lighting up, taking in extra sugar radioactively, which allows us to see the tumor clearly. This is not something that is not known, and yet Commonly, what are they feeding in the chemotherapy labs? It's sugar and carbs and candy and cookies and such. And this is not what the body needs. It's shown in the literature that if we work on metabolically addressing the client, that not only can things like chemotherapy and radiation be more effective, but you're actually working on healing the body so that it can do its job of healing itself. That's probably the biggest one. The one I'm most passionate about. So hormones, we all know the hormones are an issue, especially with things like breast cancer. A lot of them are hormone driven. So why are we not testing the sex hormones? And if they do, why are they looking at blood? We know that that is not where you should be looking at hormones. So this is the sex hormones, and also looking at how they metabolize. How are we getting rid of them? Are we recirculating them? As well as thyroid. If our thyroid hormones are off and not giving our body the full energy it needs, how in the world can it heal? So we've got to make sure we look at that thyroid. The microbiome, so much press out there about the microbiome. So this is not only the good bacteria, but are there pathogens? How is the digestion? You can eat all the expensive organic food you want, but if you're not digesting it, you don't get the nutrients. And that's super key when you're in a cancering state. Stress. So this includes the circadian rhythm of when you're asleep and when you go to bed and such, when you're awake rather. And this is your adrenal hormones. So what is amping you up? And this can be things like your boss yelling at you or a fight with your husband, but this also can be, you have a chronic blood sugar issue. You have an infection that's always just sitting there. And whatever is stressing your body is going to be ramping that up. Environmental toxins is another area, and this includes a huge amount of things that people are not talking about. So heavy metals, non-metal toxins, as well as mold. And I'm going to tell you a little secret. I test these on all of my clients. I don't want to leave any stone unturned. And I have only had one cancer client not have high levels of mold. This is huge. And we know it's carcinogenic. And have you ever heard of an oncologist testing for this? If you get that tumor gone, whatever way you want to get it gone, and then you go right back into that moldy house, would it be surprising that the tumor comes back? I wouldn't think so. That should be obvious, right? But this is not being looked at. The immune system, this is where the magic should happen. And with cancer, there's usually some issues going on in terms of viral infections, crazy high iron levels and ferritin, vitamin D levels in the trash. These kinds of things need to be looked at to make sure that that immune system can do its job. Inflammation. Cancer is known to be a ball of inflammation, and we need to calm that down. So some of the things that can be going on in terms of, we look at HS, high sensitivity CRP, the SED rate, and then the LDH. Those are 3 measures of inflammation that are really key to monitor things on a little easy way that you can check all the time, not just big scans. Now, angiogenesis is another area. This is a fancy word that is talking about how when a tumor needs more blood sugar, it will actually signal the body to create more blood vessels so that it can get more blood with the blood sugar in it. And there are things like copper and such that are helping that we need to watch and see, is this happening? And let's address it and slow this down big time. And then we have the epigenetics. And I want to say epigenetics because most of us have grown up hearing that cancer is caused by genetics. It's like a Russian roulette. You get what you get, and you're going to have that. And, we see people, taking the breasts off if they have certain genes. This is not necessary, because what we have found out is that the epigenetics, so this is your diet and lifestyle, your daily choices, are actually much, much more powerful than the genetics. So by looking at the genetics, we can see, okay, I have some predispositions to this or that. I don't detox well. I don't methylate well. Let's support that. And we can use very strategic interventions based on your genetics to support the body to do what it needs to do properly. And then the last one, I think I got that all, but the mental and emotional component. And this is the one that you rarely hear people talking about. And I find it is the foundational, huge elephant in the room no one's talking about. So in the year prior to a cancer diagnosis, there's almost always something traumatic that has really impacted the cancer client's heart. It could be a loss of a job, a loss of a loved one, a loss of an animal, whatever it is, something that is going on, a failure, a problem that has really impacted them, and they haven't probably dealt with fully. And so what we see is that when we have these 10 areas, there's usually not one, but like 6 or 8 of them. And so it's finding all of these areas that are off, and they're all different for everybody. So this ends up looking very different for everyone, very personalized. That's where you know, okay, these are my areas I need to work on. I need to support my body. My body is crying out for help with these. And that's where you can get the garbage out of the way, free the body up so that it can do its job of healing itself.
It's actually really encouraging to know that there are processes and protocols and tests that go beyond assumption, because that's just my opinion. Of course,
Yes.
I'm not a medical doctor, but there have been so many fundraisers, and you just keep waiting for them to bring something more to the table, and so
But the problem with that, and I'm so glad you mentioned that, the problem with that is that our traditional standard of care is looking for one thing.
Right.
And it's never going to be one thing. We know that cancer is multifactorial, but they're looking for one thing, one magic bullet that they can patent and market, and it's not one thing.
Right. I think it's fascinating because I believe that the body is designed to heal. That's my personal belief. And I think through history, that has been shown that can happen. To your point, the mental, the physical, the emotional, the spiritual, there's so many components to who we are as a person. And so I love that you look at the whole person, because that's who we are. Now, when you help these people with their cancer, what is the general kind of direction that you go first? Is it the testing, and how do you help them with that, like you said, they always have some kind of a big issue that's happened? How do you help someone navigate, because now they have fear because of the cancer, right? So that whole mental and emotional piece, you're kind of on both sides of the fence. You're trying to take what's in the past and what's in the present. So how do you help navigate that?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked. That's a brilliant question. So I start with, like, let's get the testing rolling, because it takes a little while to collect the samples, send things in, and I want to get things moving as soon as possible. And then while we're waiting for that process, we start working on some of the pieces that are just kind of the foundation, generic for everybody. So let's clean up the diet. Let's, start to work on unpacking, like, what are your emotional components and such. Because once we get the diet, now it'll get more dialed in once the test results come in, but getting into a basic, let's work on the metabolism, blood sugar regulation and such, that's going to do a lot of work. And for a lot of people, that's a huge shift. But again, like I mentioned, most of my clients already have a pretty clean diet. It's about tweaks. And so as we get the test back in, that's when we get, I like to call them my smoking guns. Lay them out on the table. We can prioritize which need to be dealt with first and how do they need to be addressed concurrently. Because we want to, especially with cancer, move forward at a fairly rapid pace. We don't want to dilly-dally. And that's where it frustrates me, because a lot of practitioners will, oh, okay, you're having hormonal symptoms. Let's just test the hormones. And then, oh, well, that wasn't the issue. Okay, well, maybe we should look at mold, and maybe we should look at and so it's this thing that drags out for months and years. I want to see it all at one time so we can address things in the way that they need to be addressed, that we've seen them clinically work best. And so then there's the implementation of all the protocols. So things have been tweaked and dialed in for the individual. And, as with any chronic disease, it's not a linear thing. There's hiccups and bumps, as well as just a huge learning curve of, like, how do I cook like this? How do I do a coffee enema? Some of this stuff is weird. And, navigating that along the way.
Mm. What I hear you saying is it's like a puzzle, and every person's, picture outcome of their puzzle is different. So you're basically finding those pieces, figuring out how to fit them together for the most positive outcome.
Absolutely. And part of that, especially when we're talking about the toxins, when some of this stuff comes back, it's not just like, let's address this and, help you. It's where is this coming from? If I have a client coming in and they have high levels of arsenic or they've got huge toxic levels of mold, we need to make sure that the inflow is stopped. So that includes, testing their home and their water and, things like that. So there's a lot of detective work with this process because the most important thing is to stop the inflow, because otherwise you're just wasting your time and money spinning your wheels. It's not actually going to get out of you if it's still coming in.
Yeah. Yeah. How are these people finding you? Because I know you had your own cancer journey. So how do you promote what you're doing and find people? Are you finding that people on the fringe that are like trying not to use traditional therapies, or where is your market?
Yeah. So for me, at this point, I am pretty much 100% referral and full. I can only help because I like to work in a very hands-on way. So many people. And so I have actually just launched a group program so that I can help more people at once. And we're going to be doing some marketing and such just to get the word out there because we'll be able to handle more people, which I'm excited about.
That's fantastic. And how does something virtual like that work? Do you still have the same testing process and that sort of thing?
Generally, the program looks the same. There's a couple different aspects. One is that instead of getting one-on-one time, like you would with the private program, you would get group program. And so there's a huge online course that helps you go over all your labs and understand what the different markers mean to really empower you. Because I find that a lot of cancer clients, they want to understand. They're not just looking for give me the drug and I don't want to know what's going on. That's like the opposite. So I get excited. I love education and explaining this stuff to clients. And then we have group sessions where we can problem solve specifics for the individual, answer questions, how does, whether it's something about, modality and how to actually implement at home or a cooking style or something. We go through all that kind of stuff in the classes and I'm sorry, the group sessions. And then I'm super excited because I found that when people are working this way, they're very alone. I know I was. Back when I had my cancer journey, I didn't know anyone that was doing it natural. And I was the weirdo. And having people that there's real people out there doing this too is so helpful. So we have a community where people can connect with each other, whether it's to encourage each other or share recipes or just to know that there's other people out there, I think is really powerful. So there's some different shifts. The cost is less, but it has all the same functional labs. You get them all, and you get all the tools to go over them, the protocols. You get access to all your supplements wholesale, all sorts of different discounts and fun things like that.
I would imagine that going through something like this in community would be a very helpful part of the healing process.
Yeah, there's a huge mental aspect of, am I doing enough?
Mm,
Am I doing the right things? Because the $1 million question when you go outside the box is it enough? Is it the
yes.
right thing? Because there are so many therapies. And unfortunately, the alternative world of oncology gets kind of a bad rap because there's not a whole lot of research. There's not a whole lot of testing going on and following through. There's not like guidelines and protocols that we can track and look at clinically, which my mentor, Dr. Naisha Winters, is working on. I'm excited to say. But what we want to do is test and not guess, because that's what I'm seeing a lot is people come and they're like, oh, well, I'm doing IV vitamin C and I'm doing hyperbaric. And I'm looking at their labs going, oh, for you, that is not a great choice. but no one ever did the labs.
Mm.
And there are markers specifically that we can see on the labs, like, yes, this would be good, or no, this is going to make things actually worse. And I'm a huge fan of those therapies that I just mentioned when it's the right time in the right situation. And the other thing is that they're very expensive, a lot of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to really pick, like, looking at those areas, the 10 areas I just mentioned, there are some that are going to pop out as like, oh my goodness, that is your thing. You need to work on that. And if that's not something that IV vitamin C is going to be helping, is it really the best use of your time and money? I want to be very strategic about how people use their time and money so they can be really targeted. I mean, very few people come to me where they just have unlimited funds and want to do everything and have all day long. It just gets to be a very expensive, very time consuming thing if you play the game of what else is this enough? And that's what I want to help people figure out, what is strategically best for them.
Mm-hmm. You're basically you're removing the medical whack-a-mole.
Test, don't guess.
I would imagine that it's possibly unnerving to go outside of the quote known protocols, because I understand that people that I've met, when they go outside of that prescribed protocol, sometimes their doctor doesn't support them anymore. How do you help people whose doctors basically say, do it my way or I will not treat you? Do you have that? And what do you do?
Yeah, that's a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Now I will say a lot of my clients have kind of made the choice like I did, and that's not what they want. And they just step outside completely. But I am happy to work if their oncologist is willing to work with them in figuring out what the best plan is for them. Now, I just have to say this. If the oncologist, doctor, naturopath, whatever practitioner you're working with, is not willing to do what you want, you got to remember, this is a service industry. It's your body at the end of the day, and you should be the one that gets to make the decision,
Mm-hmm.
whether they like it or not. And that, I think, has been lost on a lot of us. The doctor said, so I have to do this. No, it's your body. If you want to ram it into the ground, or if you want to heal it and support it, that's your choice. And I would recommend to everyone to do as much research as you can. And do it with an open mind, because a lot of people go into it thinking, they already have a bias. And I think this is what saved my life, honestly, is that I went into the cancer and I said, okay, clearly something I'm doing did not work. I need to look at everything with an open mind, all the different therapies, and see what is going to be right for me. Because if you look at it and you only look at the areas you already think are right, that's what you're going to see. And that isn't necessarily going to give you truth. So just remember, if you have somebody, a practitioner, no matter what kind of practitioner, if they are not willing to do what you want for your body and support you and help you with that, just find someone else. You're paying them. You should get what you want, in my opinion. And I really feel passionate about that. If you can't tell, because I see this happen all the time where their doctors are dictating things and they're like, but I don't want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Go somewhere else. You can. We have the freedom at this point to do that. So exercise it.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Yes. I 100% agree with that. Matter of fact, I think I've had some of those conversations. It's one of those things where we have the ability to choose the life that we live right now. Like you said, we have the ability right now to choose the life that we live, the freedom to not go to someone who is in opposition to what we feel in our own body is the right thing to do. And I think maybe we could talk a little bit about that intuitive side of the process that you help people with.
Oh, yes. I can't tell you how often I see that intuition kick in, especially with women. Yeah. No offense, guys, but listening to your body, and if you feel like, okay, this therapy I am drawn to, or this therapy I just don't want it. Like, listen to that. I mean, I have clients all the time. They'll be taking quite a few supplements and they're like, something's not sitting in my tummy well. And I'll say, which one is it? And they know. And there's no logical reason how they would know which of those supplements. If they're taking 10 supplements, how would they know which one? But they do almost every time. And that intuition. And then just to take it a step further, I feel very strongly that, it's not just inside you, but it's actively asking God, like, please show me which of these therapies is going to be helpful, because at the end of the day, He's the one that made your body, and He knows way better than any practitioner or even you do what would actually be best. And I think that that's a really important, I like to validate that with people, because I think we've separated everything so much that people feel like they shouldn't listen to their intuition or to God. It should just be dictated to them.
Well, I'm wondering if the dictated part feels more secure, because when you step outside of what is known, it can feel very much like, where's the ground? Do you know what I mean?
Oh, yes, yes. And this is where I see the biggest difference between clients in terms of awesome outcomes. The people that take responsibility, own what's going on, and are actively working on their stuff. And I mean that generically, because whether it's diet or the relationships or any of that stuff, but if they're owning it and actively working on it, versus stick your head in the ground, somebody else tell me what to do, I'm not involved, I don't really want to think about this, those people are not going to have the great outcomes, regardless of if they both do the exact same treatments. It's just not going to be the same. There's an energetic component of taking responsibility. And this is where I get really excited with the new group program, because I am encouraging that throughout my one-on-one and the group program, because I really feel like, not only because of the immediate benefits of taking ownership, but the long term, because this is not an easy process. This is not do this for 6 months and you're done. This is a lifestyle shift so that it's not going to come back. And if people don't take responsibility and actively engage in it, it's not going to work.
It's a paradigm shift first, probably, right?
Absolutely. Exactly.
Yeah. It's amazing how powerful that part of us is, the way that we think and the way that we perceive things.
It is so much more powerful than I think that we give it credit for, because like you were talking about earlier, we have choice in every single thing that happens to us. And I think we stop seeing some of the choices often. But how you want to react to a cancer diagnosis, the idea that you have different choices in treatments and stuff, there's always an option. When you feel boxed in, if you start getting outside the box and getting outside of yourself, there's always options.
I keep going back to, in my mind, the struggle that we have just as humans, to have security and comfort and knowledge, right? And cancer takes us out of that. It throws a huge wrench in the works of, like you said, if somebody feels like they've been doing the right things, I've been eating the right things, I've been exercising, because I think we feel that if we do this, this, and this, we're totally solid. But what I hear you saying is, there's so much more going on in our bodies and in the environment around us, that it's not like we've done something, quote, wrong.
Yes. Yes, that is a huge message that I think is very important, because clients come in and they think I'm going to tell them to do things they've already done. I think they've already done their best. There's things they don't know about. And unfortunately, the world we live in today, there are so many chemicals and contaminants that we aren't even aware of. Like literally, we don't even have tests for all these things in our environment that we are completely unaware of, in our air, our soil, our water, like things that are in, the cushions of our chairs and all our clothing. I mean, it's insane. And those of us that are a little more sensitive, that would be me included, I suck at detoxification. I always need to help my body ongoing. That's what I learned with the genetic stuff. I need to be doing things every day to make sure that, not only get the toxins lower in coming in, but to keep them moving out. And so understanding this about yourself, it's like, I didn't do something wrong. I just didn't know as much as I know now. And now I have tools to help myself so that it's not going to come back. And that gives me peace that is worth millions. Probably, I think it's probably invaluable just to know, like, I'm not constantly looking over my shoulder of like, when's the other shoe going to drop? I know my areas. I know what I need to work on. I know what I need to be doing on a daily basis. And sometimes I get a little lax, but it's not a big thing. And if I have some symptoms come up, I'm like, oh, I need to go and check this test. This is way before a tumor would be showing up. And this is where I feel like I have power. I have control. I have things that I can shift and do on my own if I want to be able to have that freedom and knowledge of that peace. I'm not waiting for it to come back.
Which is so encouraging.
Yes.
You know, that
Yes.
you're not like you're not a victim.
I am not a victim. And honestly, I know this might sound a little flippant, but I am actually super grateful for cancer because it showed me some health issues, specifically some genetic tendencies towards Alzheimer's, which is now called type 3 diabetes. And I had serious insulin resistance, which I had no symptoms of, and there's several other things like the hypothyroid I had and the toxins, the mold and everything. These also all play into Alzheimer's. And my dad has serious Alzheimer's right now. And I'm looking at him, I'm going, oh my goodness, I would take cancer over Alzheimer's every day of the week. That is just awful to watch what he's going through. And so I'm seeing this as a wake-up call for me. Now I have the tools to prevent that. And with Alzheimer's, it's a prevention game. It's not a turn things around game like cancer is, but it gave me a whole new career that I find incredibly satisfying. I love helping people, but I also have tools to make sure that my end of life is as good as possible.
Yeah, it's interesting how some of these things have become, quote, normal, huh? Like it's just kind of almost like we are being conditioned to accept the reality that this is what will be. And that bothers me.
It bothers me intensely. And as a woman that is approaching the perimenopause, menopause phase, like that's one that is near and dear to my heart because it is not normal to have all the crazy symptoms that we think of as normal. And I think that example is one that us women kind of can identify with. But when your hormones are dialed in and, the blood sugar regulation is dialed in, theoretically, and I've seen this case after case, it just slides in. And you don't have the hot flashes and all the stuff. And I'll be watching the next several years as I slide myself into it. But I'm feeling like I have my finger on the pulse of the areas that I need to for cancer that are also going to be contributing with that because all these health things, they're also tied together. Things like menopause symptoms are signs that hormones are off, which are one of the areas for cancer and such. So it's, whether you want to flavor it of it's leaning towards osteoporosis or cancer or Alzheimer's or any of these other bigger issues, all those little symptoms, even if it's something like your fingernails crack a lot, or you have a lot of split ends and your hair's not growing as much. These are all little sniggly things that sometimes it's an aesthetic thing that we care about it for, but there are reasons to look into what's going on with your body that are usually poo-pooed by, standard of care. They don't have time with the insurance the way it's set up to be able to actually address these issues.
Plus, to be fair, they have compartmentalized our body.
Yes.
So we cannot get answers for my elbow if I'm looking at my nose, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it drives me crazy because they're not looking at it as a whole. And to me, if you don't look at it as a whole functioning together, when we compartmentalize, it makes it easier for us practitioners to learn things. We've got this system and that system, but they all interact. Like all these things, like I was talking about all those areas, like all the hormones affect the gut and the gut affects the hormones. It's not that clear cut. And this is where we need to look at ourselves as a much more complex being than we ever thought. And, that's not even diving into the energetics and the electrical fields and all this other stuff that we don't even talk about in, the medicine realm and such. We're very looking at just the chemical aspect, which is another big bucket to look at.
So when you say energetically, are you talking about how we engage with our environment and our, whether we're thinking negatively, like, is it a mindset thing? Or are you just talking about being in toxic situations? What is that you mean?
Yeah, so this is a very big general term. And so I'm talking about at the cellular atomic level, we have charges, positive and negative. And energetically, that makes a big difference in terms of how our body functions, along with the chemical aspect. But I'm also talking about at kind of more of a global level, what you mentioned in terms of how we relate and the emotional components and the connections and the relationships plays such a huge role in it. And I feel like of my 10 areas, one of them kind of deals with this, but there's a lot more out there that I think going forward, we're going to have a lot more information. But again, we want to shift the narrative inside ourselves so that we're really looking at the world with a positive aspect, and we can let those negative things pass through us and not get stuck and cause this like constant irritation, which our emotions actually manifest themselves physically into our tissue. There's a lot of interesting research with the fascia showing that this happens, and yet we're not talking about it clinically and dealing with it. And that's a really important component.
I've come across an organization called Human Garage, and they do work around that. And I've also have a book called The Body Keeps the Score. And
great book.
That book is intense, because if there's stuff that's undealt with, maybe stuff you don't remember, can be a little emotional. But I have talked to several people about this idea, and that's why I'm glad that you brought it up, that, things get stuck. And I don't mean this like metaphysically, like I'm a Christian, so I believe, that God created and designed my body, but we're also mind, body, and spirit. So there is this reality to what we think, not just what we eat, what we do, how we feel. All of those things work together. And that is what the components are that are making us who we are and how our body is coping in the world that we live in.
Oh, yes, you are speaking my language. I agree with that so wholeheartedly. And, we try to do this reductionistic, make things really simplistic, and it doesn't work like that. The state that, and there's research showing, the state you are in mentally when you start to eat food is going to affect the release of your digestive juices. Like if you're in this amped up sympathetic state, you're not going to actually release the digestive juices. Like that's what everybody is doing now. And so you can eat, whatever's on the nutrition label, but you're not necessarily going to get what's on the nutrition label. And your body is so smart because God created it that way that it knows what to absorb and what not to. And there's so many levels of this that just blows the mind. And this is where I'm excited to see more research go into, hopefully, although there's not a lot of funding probably for it, but there's a lot of, you just look at the way that it works and it's just screaming God's design. It's a beautiful thing.
For me specifically, and to me, this ties in, but when I remember to apply biblical wisdom to my life, for example, be anxious for nothing, but in everything with prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. Then the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds. Like those principles are, we think of them as just spiritual principles, but there is a mental and an emotional aspect to that truth as I apply it to my life that allows my body, right, to inhabit this space in a much more, I guess, at ease, at peace, less resistance. And I'm wondering about that emotional resistance. Is that a piece of the puzzle that can cause us to be sick?
I think so. I mean, we don't have research on that, but I 100% agree with what you're saying. I think there's a lot a lot of wisdom in terms of what the Bible actually says. If you go through, like, I love the verse that you picked out there. It is very specifically like, it's talking about your adrenal hormones and such. And like, we have tools now and tests to like prove that what the Bible's saying is true. Now, I'm sure there's still a lot in the Bible that we can't prove yet, but it's just because of our own limitations. It's not because the Bible is not true. And if we would take more of that into heart and actually apply it, I think we would see a lot of the stuff that we're seeing in terms of chronic disease going crazy and stuff. I mean, a lot of it has to do with, we live in a very fallen world. There's a lot of sin, not necessarily just our own, other people's, that we are paying the cost for. And but there's things we can do, and there's hope, and that's what the Bible is showing us.
I think the element of faith gives us that spiritual and mental ability to navigate all of these unknowns that you're talking about. Now, if you were to give my audience 3 things, because to your point, I think your topic, your area of specialty is, it's amazing. It's multifaceted. There's so much going on, but what can you say to someone who hears all this, and whether or not they have cancer, what are 3 things you really think? Maybe you should do 3 things for someone who doesn't have cancer and 3 things for someone who does. I don't know how you want to do it, but that we can anchor in on to take in what you're saying and change our bodies and lives so that we are in a more supportive and healthy state.
Yeah. So I kind of view cancer, instead of you have it or you don't, black and white, I view it as a spectrum. And, there's a point where we get a diagnosis based on standard of care's measurements. But to me, there's a lot going on beforehand. It's in the same zone. It's just a continuum. And so to me, the messages are the same, and the work, the program is the same. Whether it just depends on how far you are along the spectrum, how much harder it's going to be to turn the Titanic around, so to speak, based on where you're on the spectrum. So the first thing is I would just really try to get it into people's head, and your listeners, work on getting it into your head, is that cancer is not caused by one thing. It's not your fault. It's not one thing. It's usually 6 to 8 of those areas that I was talking about. Like, it's a lot of them, and it looks different for every single person. The second thing would be that it's important to know that standard of care is not even looking at the root cause of why you got cancer. So if you want to prevent a recurrence, even if you've already gone through cancer treatment, I work with a lot of people that have done standard of care, they did the radiation surgery, all that stuff, and they've started to become more educated through the process and realize that that didn't address why I got this. And, they come back around, do the program afterwards. It's not the acute state. It's not the pressure and the time crunch, but that way they're preventing recurrence, which is a beautiful thing, because that is the part that I think is the worst for a lot of people, is that living with the fear of having to go through that again. And then the third thing I would say is that it's important that you really understand that everyone is different. There is no one size fits all in terms of addressing these issues, especially in terms of alternative treatment. If there is a practitioner that's saying, oh, everybody should get IV vitamin C, I'm just picking on that one today, but turn and run, because they're obviously not testing. They're not looking at you as an individual. And I see this all the time. They've got an expensive IV suite. They need to get bodies in there. It's not what you're looking for. You need somebody that's really going to look at your G6PD and see if it's appropriate for you, and look at, like, what are your areas? Is this the most effective use of your money? Like we mentioned, even something simple like matcha, green tea. People read online. Matcha is really good. It's got ECGC in it. It's helped with cancer. Well, here's the thing. If you genetically have called a COMT gene that's slow, you're going to want to see as far away from matcha as possible, because it's going to slow it down further. Now, what that gene does is it slows down your body's getting extra hormones and neurotransmitters out of the body. So if you have cancer, a lot of cancer people have that slow gene, you don't want it slowed down. You want it sped up to get those extra hormones out that might be affecting the cancer. And so this is where, it's very personalized, looking at what specifically do you need. Okay, so cancer is not one thing. Get to the root issue and make it bio-individual. Everybody's different. Those would be my 3 things.
Terrific. And how can people find you, Katrina?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find me on Instagram. It's just my name, Katrina Foe. You can find me on Facebook. It's nutritional.pilates. That's the name of my book as well. And then I will give you a link if you are interested in diving in more to some of these different 10 areas and the testing and stuff. It's called The Roadmap to Prevent Cancer Recurrence. It's an ebook. I'll give you the free link to that. And then, of course, my website is cancerfreedom.com.
Fantastic. Katrina, I want to thank you so much for being on the show today. And I really, really appreciate the journey that you've been on and how you've chosen to turn it into a vehicle for other people to find healing and wholeness and a peace about their ability to have some autonomy in the process of cancer. I think it's just a beautiful thing. And I want to thank you so much for taking the time to be on my show today.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Fantastic. Friends, today, if you find us on YouTube, look down below. The links will be right there. You can get a hold of that ebook, no problem. If you need to come back later and you happen to be driving and listening to the podcast that way, you can head on over to www.feminineroadmap.com/episode 361. And all of those links will be in the show notes. Friends, I hope that this conversation has sparked something in you to think about the power that you have in your own healthcare, the power that you have to have the healthy body that you want, and that there are resources out there that can help you accomplish those 2 things. You do not have to be a victim. You do not have to do what you are told to do by whomever is telling you that if you don't do it their way. If you feel bullied in the system, be encouraged. There are other options. And you know what? Today, as we record this, we still have the freedom of choice. And I highly encourage you to take control of your choice and find the support that you need for the body that you have. And if there's a loved one in your life, share this episode with them. Get them on the journey of at least investigating some of these things. Friends, our bodies are designed to heal. We just live in a world that is constantly kind of working against the natural way that our bodies are meant to be. But that doesn't mean that we can't have victory in health. And I want to encourage you to know that there are things we can do. Please don't be discouraged. Be encouraged by this conversation. Tap into Katrina's resources and please share them with your friends. Thank you so much for being with us today. And I look forward to sharing more inspirational people, strategies, and stories with you in the weeks to come. Take care, my friends. Bye-bye.